Also, you have noted, of course, that I have a different color vestment on today. The chasubles of a different color. The reason for that is because my mother said I look really good in it. Therefore, no one else's comments matter. But today is Gaudete Sunday, which means rejoice. The church says in the middle of our walking and preparing, let's stop for a minute and let's give a new visual, if you will. All right. I will forego those beautiful scriptures from Isaiah, as we've been hearing them for a few weeks now, in deference to those from the epistle from James today. So who here, by a show of hands, has said to yourself or said to someone else or both, I need more patience? Those of you who didn't raise your hand, you may go. Mass is ended for you. Go in peace. All of us, I am quite sure, Advent themes, they trumpet patience and waiting. While we practice patience, I've mentioned that today is Gaudete Sunday. Gaudete is the imperative of the verb in Latin, which means to rejoice. But literally, as the imperative, it says, you rejoice now. That's a command. It's an order. Rejoice. Whether we are patiently waiting or impatiently waiting, this Sunday, the scriptures tell us to rejoice. Why? Because God has a plan. The plan is for our good. And when God plans, He does it with infinite patience. And when God plans, God succeeds. And God will succeed, even though the plan is not yet completed. So let me say it again. God has infinite patience. That is sufficient reason for us to rejoice. So this morning, allow me to use the words of St. James to speak to us about God's patience. Listen again. Be patient, brothers and sisters, until the coming of the Lord. See how the farmer waits for the precious fruit of the earth, being patient with it until it receives the early and late rains. Let me take you outside for a minute and into the life of the local farmers. It's not hard to spot them these days. A few days ago, I was walking and I found myself walking more briskly than usual. Why? Because it was cold. Cold gets to me. Cold reduces my thinking to very elementary thoughts, forgetting almost all else. What's on my schedule tomorrow, what bills I have to pay, anything I can forget about. All I think of is, I want to be warmer. And that's not the worst of it. As I was walking, it was not only cold, but there was a cold mist falling. And it was cold and it was wet. Now, years ago, when my father was still amongst us, and he'd love to know that he's now an illustration in my homilies, he'd speak of winter time in North Dakota, how cold it was. And I'd tell him, Dad, why don't you and Mom just move to a warmer place during the winter? To which he'd reply, Well, it's not so bad. I know spring is coming, and at least it's not that damp cold. I told him, Dad, when it's below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it is damp cold. Here, even above 32 degrees, it is damp cold. Walking in the damp cold, I passed a field where the soil had just been turned. You've seen the picture. Black, chunky soil, now black, chunky, and shiny through the foggy, wet, damp cold, just laying there. As James says in the epistle, the farmer isn't concerned about the cold soil. Why? Because when he turned the soil, he also removed the large stones, if there were any, that impede his next harvest. And turning the soil, buried the weeds. And now the soil rests from the previous harvest. And as he watches patiently, he knows that time will come to plant new seeds and they will grow. Let me take you back to that black field and apply it in a different way. Brothers and sisters, every one of us knows that deep in the substance of who we are, there is an awareness that we are not quite right. And deep within us, we're glued to that stuff which we wish weren't there. And we aren't proud of that stuff. We call it sin and sinful nature. We try to look hard, to look right to others, and to work hard to make ourselves right. And deep within us, we'd like to tell someone what's not right with us. And deep within, we come to believe that God wills for us to be free from sin. At daily Mass one day this past week, I asked the attendees, if someone were to ask you, what does God will? What does God will for you? What would you say? There were many brilliant answers. To be happy. To go to heaven. But let me reduce all of the answers to one sentence. God wills us to be free from sin. Sin causes so much suffering and impatience with God, with self, and with others. Let's go a little bit deeper. Just as the farmer mentioned earlier turned the soil, so also God sometimes turns our soil and asks us to turn the soil of our souls, not planting seed upon old seed upon old seed, time and again running into those same rocks and weeds we wish weren't there. Rather, God wills infinitely and passionately that we be free from sin so that the good fruit of His Spirit may be abundant in us. You have heard only God can forgive sin. After Jesus was crucified by sin, He appeared to His disciples, locked in their sin. And He said, "Peace be with you." And He said, "I forgive you." He established His church then and there, and He asked His apostles to forgive sin in his name. And he gave the church the sacrament of reconciliation. Quick commercial, Wednesday from 1700 to 1900 hours. 7 priests will be here for you to tell and for them to absolve you of your sin. They who are also sinners know full well the power of Christ to forgive sin. Jesus wills us to be free from sin. Do not be afraid to come.